Alright, so before we start, I want to address two things. One, when I was first doing this video, I thought that this is supposed to be something that we found interesting in U.S. history, but by the time I realized that it wasn't, um, it was already too late. I already sunk a lot of time into it. But regardless, I do find this kind of interesting. And also, you might be thinking to yourself, "Oh, elections, that sounds really boring. Why should I know about this?" Yeah, sure. I don't disagree with you. I guess elections are kind of a boring subject, but I'm gonna try to do my best to make it seem a little bit more interesting. Gonna add some it's gonna be a lot more lighthearted. It's not gonna be in depth look of stuff. Not too in depth, anyways. And yeah, let's just jump into it. So let's start off with the very first election in U.S. history because obviously that's important. So here we have Washington, your boy George Washington. He won 100% of the electoral votes, which is honestly kind of sus. You're telling me that everyone loved Washington, like even his political opponents, like they didn't even think to vote for themselves. Anyways, these elections introduced representative democracy into the world and set the precedent for future presidents in their election. That was a terrible joke. Washington's two-term limit would remain unbroken until 1940, which is more than 150 years after the first election, which that's pretty important, I guess, right? All right. Next up, we got the Revolution of 1800. So, while it is named the Revolution, it's not necessarily an actual revolution, with wars like the American French Revolution. Instead, the election was more of a testament to American democracy, as it actually showed that the transfer of political power from one party to the other could have been done in a peaceful and nonviolent way. And just like Washington's election, the significance of this election is the future precedent that this set for the peaceful transfer of political power, just in general, because you just see how many different times the U.S. and its presidency is switched between political parties. All right, next up we got your boy JQA and his corrupt bargain. This is a hefty one. So election of 1824. This is a weird election. So it's the only election where the person with the most electoral votes, that is Jackson, lost the election. It's one of 5 elections in U.S. history where the president who won the popular vote, or as in where the candidate won the popular vote, lost the election. This is Jackson, and it also ended the era of good feelings in America with the rise of the Democratic Party, one of the major political parties in the U.S., and was formed by Andrew Jackson in response to this very election. Jackson's supporters denounced this election as corrupt, as Henry Clay, Speaker of the House and one of the 4 presidential candidates, was kicked out of the race, but still had massive influence over deciding the presidency. And Clay, he didn't like Jackson. He's like, all right, let's just go with JQA. And then JQA, he's like, you know what? That was a good move. How about I just add you to the cabinet? Jackson supporters were like, yo, this is some whack stuff. That's why the Democratic Party's rise. And if you look at that, it's pretty interesting. Yeah, this is a pretty whack thing. Screw you, JQA. This is why you only got one term. So to follow up, 1828. So by this time, Jackson's political party was in full swing, and Jackson swiftly beat JQA. Look at that. He got his butt handed to him on a platter. And this would give rise to the era of Jackson and Jacksonian democracy. No longer would the common man be oppressed by the rich. No longer would a tiny minority determine the outcome of the elections. No longer would the ideas of the public be unheard, and no longer would tyrannical leaders pervert the idea of democracy in the U.S. No longer would this occur. Oh, and also Jackson beat the living hell out of this assassin, this guy right here. So much so that the crowd basically had to pull the president away from killing his assassin. I just thought that was cool. It has no relation to the election. Just, yeah, the president killed his own assassin, basically. All right, moving on. So, I mean, before we move on, I just want to say, we talk about how the Gilded Age, right? Those presidents are all the forgotten presidents. Come on, are you kidding me? You're gonna tell me that someone like Millard Fillmore and John Tyler and Zachary Taylor aren't the most irrelevant names and people you've ever heard in your life? Come on, if I were to go to some random person, if I were to go to Missouri and I were to ask people a 50 2 people alright, so we have Millard Fillmore and we have Peter Varela. Which of these was an American president? I bet you 9 out of 10 people would say Peter Varela, because at least he's more relevant than freaking, I don't even remember the guy's name. Anyways, the rest of these elections are all irrelevant until 1860, the big one, Lincoln slavery. And to sum it up, um, yeah, that's basically what happened. All right, so um, yeah, it was interesting since Lincoln wasn't even on the ballot in the South at all, but he still won the election with the help of the North and the West. And Lincoln won by the second smallest popular vote margin in U.S. history, with less than 40%, which first goes to JQA. And oh yeah, this election was also like a direct cause for the South seceding from the Union. But I mean, like that's not that important, Like who cares about that? And who really cares about that? Okay, so this looks a bit weird. Seems a bit out of place, and let me explain. So, this is the election of 1868, and this is some random election. I think it's 1880 or something. It's not important. The point is, no, oh shoot. The point is, you can see that the South usually voted Democratic in this area, and like the North and such voted Republican. But as you can see here, there's Republican in the South. What is this sorcery? What's going on here? Why are these fine gentlemen here? So the reason is because of Reconstruction and the radical Republicans who enforced it. So the Reconstruction Amendments allowed for African Americans to vote in massive numbers, leading to the temporary political change switch, in the South, where Grant and Hayes would win these states through African Americans being able to vote. It even allowed for African Americans to run and obtain political offices in the U.S. However, this change would only be temporary, as this election would end Reconstruction in the South. This election was the second election where the candidate who won the popular vote lost the election, and was also the closest electoral vote in U.S. history. It was 185 to 184. More significantly, the Compromise of 1877 ended Reconstruction in the South, and African Americans would once again be disenfranchised and racially oppressed again. This would lead to the rise of Jim Crow. Hayes' election marked an end to the slavery and issues that started in 1844 because of the Mexican-American Civil War, or Mexican-American War. And this issue wouldn't really reemerge until the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s. So let me remind you, this is nearly a century of disenfranchisement, just like out of nowhere. That sucks. From Hayes to Eisenhower, the South continued to discriminate against African Americans, using tenant farming and sharecropping as a new form of slavery. The rise of the KKK and Jim Crow laws, along with poll taxes and literacy tests, completely suppressed blacks for nearly a century. Oh, and this election really isn't that important. The only reason I brought it up is because it's the third election in U.S. history where the candidate who received the popular vote, Cleveland, lost to Harrison. And also, it's also cool because Cleveland won 2 non-consecutive terms, making him the 22nd and 24th president. So we've had 45 presidents, but 44 distinct presidents because of Cleveland. Not important. Anyways. Okay, yeah, this is a great election. So, as the title implies, this is one hell of an election. In 1908, Teddy Roosevelt decided that he wouldn't run for a third president and passed the presidency over to his good old friend William Howard Taft. Basically supposed to be the second Teddy Roosevelt, but Taft kind of pissed off everyone in the Republican Party, and that led to Teddy Roosevelt saying, "Nah, man, you whack." And he's like, you know what? I'm so baller. I'm just gonna form my own goddamn party. All right, like screw you. And you know what? He did pretty good for himself. You see all these green stuff? That's Roosevelt under his own independent party. Like, yeah, like Taft, that sucks. All right, Roosevelt. This is why he was voted as like the most influential person in U.S. history. All right, like, come on. But, like, you see this huge map, and you're like, what the hell? How did Wilson get all this thing? Must have been really popular. No, that's not true. Roosevelt, and Taft, because they were both Republicans, they basically split the vote for all Republican voters. Republican voters went half and half on this. Half voted for Taft. Well, I guess less than half. And then a lot more voted for Roosevelt. But then because of that sort of split, and because the Electoral College only you win a state if you win the majority, or the plurality, not even the majority, not even like more than 50%, Wilson was able to basically sweep all these states right here. So Wilson really only won 42% of the popular vote. And yeah, I don't know. This is also the only election in U.S. history where a third-party candidate got both a higher electoral and popular vote than one of the main party candidates. But like, what can I say, right? Teddy Roosevelt is one hell of a guy. All right, FDR wins in a landslide. Do I really need to go over this one? I mean, I think we all know. Great Depression, economy sucks, Hoover sucks. FDR's like, yo, New Deal, check it. People are like, that's pretty cool. Hoover, you suck. FDR, landslide. All right, next. Oh, damn it, we're still talking about FDR. All right. All right. These are actually sort of important because FDR ran for an unprecedented third and fourth term. So, I mean, Grant, Ulysses S. Grant, he said that he was going to run for a third term, but he never ended up. And Teddy Roosevelt did run for a third term, but he didn't win. FDR is the only president in U.S. history to win more than 2 terms, and this is because he was so popular, so loved, so widely accepted among the American people. He basically was like an extension of the American people because of how much they trusted him, that they just allowed him to sort of run for another term. Of course, he would be breaking the 2-term limit that was set by Washington, and conservatives made sure to definitely go after that. But it doesn't matter. FDR was elected in all 4 of his elections in a landslide, which I don't think any. That's crazy. That's all I have to say. That's pretty crazy. All right, 1964, the political party switch. So this is the election of 1960. This is the election of 1964. I think you can see a huge. Yes, you can see a huge cough. No, sorry. You can see a huge sort of shift in this. This is literally called the political party switch. So here you see the South voting basically blue, and for Byrd, but Byrd's also highly conservative. Whatever. We'll just pretend that this is also blue. But then in this one, what happened here? Why are they all voting red? Well, this is because Lyndon B. Johnson passed civil rights legislation, and the South had voted Democratic for 100+ years, ever since Andrew Jackson in 1828. However, because the South doesn't really have the best relationship with civil rights and African American, they turned against LBJ and voted Republican, as you can see right here. And this trend continues today. It's known as the political party switch. And this is why it's a very important thing, because this is when the ideals basically switched entirely. Conservative used to be part of the Democratic Party, but then it got switched, and so did liberal got switched too. So yeah, I just thought, yeah, it's pretty influential, right? All right, and here's the election of 1968. Now, who is this guy? Well, you may remember him as Barry Goldwater, the basically founder of the conservative movement. And Nixon won in basically a landslide, and the rise of conservatism. Conservatism was last seen prominently in the 1920s, and it surged its way back into U.S. politics, leading to the rise of the conservative movement. And Nixon also helped to utilize the Southern strategy to win over the South, but not before George Wallace of the American Independent Party went over the Deep South with this segregation today, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever speech. And as you can tell from that, he truly was a man of tolerant racial ideals. All right, let's keep going. This is the election of 1980, 1984. Again, sticking with the rise of the conservative movement, we see Reagan, the Reagan Revolution. Try to combine the words together, it doesn't really work. Anyways, you can see this. This looks, that's a lot of red. Yeah, definitely a lot of red. So the 1984 election, it's pretty crazy. Reagan won 97.6% of the Electoral College in 1984, and he won every state except for Minnesota, which was Walter Mondale's home state, and D.C., which is literally not never voted Democrat. They always vote Democrat. And I mean, Reagan's conservative policies and his charged attacks against the Soviet Union would also go on to influence 2 generations of politicians, and would also lead to the fuller polarization of U.S. politics that we can currently see today. There's not too much else I can really say about Reagan, otherwise that he was stupid popular. Look at this. What the hell? The American people absolutely adored him, and had the 22nd Amendment not passed, the one that limited term limits or whatever, Reagan most likely would have won a 3rd term.